All right, it's 11 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTB AM, and what's rare is wonderful. Keith Wood is with us in studio. Keith, welcome back.
It's kind of cool, actually, to be back in here. Yeah. It's great.
It's almost like we're coming out of a pandemic.
It's been over 2 years, strangely, yeah.
In the meantime, lots has happened. You were right. You got in a lot of trouble. You caused a lot of news. Was it last October, November time? Whenever the Van Gran news broke, and you were like, well, okay, that's fine, okay, but off you go. That was the time to off you go. And the results are that the team at the moment is playing like they're rudderless, like they don't have someone making big decisions, that they don't have long-term thinking in what's going on, and their identity of the team is difficult to discern at the moment.
Being right is there's no joy in any of that now, I have to say, but look, it's been interesting when I watched, actually, if we go back just to the game last weekend first, because we kind of get this wrong often, I think, because we can get caught into a Munster conversation, which we will at the end of it. But my overwhelming sense, there's a bit of sadness because I thought we didn't have a huge amount of structure or shape from a Munster perspective. But there also was a joy of watching a load of players that were enjoying themselves, which unfortunately for me happened to be in blue. And I thought Leinster were fantastic. They played incredibly well. They still will play better, which people are saying it was the best they'd played all season. I'm not entirely certain about that. But I felt that when they needed to, for me, the best part of the game actually was when Dialende scored, and you said, okay, there's maybe a hint of a possibility. And Leinster ramped up the game for about 7 or 8 minutes, and that 7 or 8 minutes was just it was superlative stuff. But it was at the pace and the speed and the accuracy that just you said, okay, that's the end of that little false dream that you had there, that would change. So, look, I did think Leinster, and when I look at Leinster, I would tip them for both the competitions that they're in, because I think they have that capacity to do it. I think they have a seamless nature to the play. The games they've lost is when they've made huge numbers of changes. And then they've been put under pressure. Maybe you've taken a couple of things for granted. But when they make 3 or 4 changes and the core of the team, and it doesn't matter which core of the team it is, they tend to play incredibly well. So when you looked at that team and you looked at who was sitting on the bench afterwards and you said, what's going to happen in the second half? It didn't look like anything else other than Leinster were going to go away from Munster in the second half. So I do think you have to put that in, not as a caveat, but as a statement of fact that they're in a very good shape. So if we go to Munster then, unfortunately, the comparisons just make for a very uncomfortable view. And Munster are forever, I think, held up in that mirror compared to Leinster, and Leinster who are in their pomp. So, and things are not great in Munster, so things don't look great then when you do the straight comparison. And the amount of losses that Munster have had to Leinster, the amount of wins Leinster have had over Munster, whichever way you want to put it, means that it's incredibly uncomfortable viewing.
It felt like 18 months, 2 years ago, the gap was closing, and you would have, for a home game, you would have been able to talk yourself into making the case for why Munster could win the match. It doesn't feel like we can do that at the moment.
Well, when I look at it at the moment, and I'm going to just say that Munster's imports, the big name imports have. So Dialende has played well, and he's played well in some of the big matches. RG Snyman been injured the whole time. Jenkins, even though I didn't agree with the Jenkins signing, has been injured the whole time. So you're looking for big name players and big players to have an impact, and you're trying to bring young guys through, and I think that has started to happen since the start of the pandemic, that some of the younger players are getting a chance, partly because there's almost an embargo on bringing in more players, and you have to give young guys a chance. But for me, it's like, was there any growth in the match the other day? I looked at the game the other day. I thought Munster started pretty brightly, especially in the opposition half. They looked to use the ball an awful lot more. I wouldn't have said I could fully understand their structure. It seemed still a bit haphazard. but they were trying it. But it's not from there. It's from the 22 to the opposition 10-metre line. Munster kicked the ball away. And when the ball is kicked back, Munster fullback catches the ball, runs forward 10 yards and kicks the ball away. There's nothing else happens. It's a very, very South African manner of playing, but it's a South African manner of playing when you have a huge bunch of forwards and you have a hard kick chase and you absolutely cream someone on the halfway line. And some of the discipline around that place has meant that they've given away an awful lot of penalties, and that was pretty much the game the other day. You know, and that's very frustrating. I had a conversation. Rafael Ibanez was over. We were doing a thing last night, and we had just a whole variety of interesting conversations of the transformation of what France went through over the last number of years, and it was really interesting. It's not quite what you would have thought in certain cases, but just on that example of kicking the ball to a full back, and so you're talking another hooker, same as myself, another has-been hooker, same as myself, and he's general manager of the French team, and he said, yeah, but you kick the ball to the winger, and then somebody has to link with the winger. That's the first thing that was thought. You have to always pass it to somebody and then support them, because if you are concentrating on catching the ball in the air, you don't have an appreciation of what else is happening in front of you. You can't, because you have to have your eye on the ball. So you have to have wingers coming back in around, taking the ball, and then you can see it. Then you have people who are looking elsewhere, and but that doesn't seem to be within it. Now, that's only one thing, but it's funny, I was looking at his idea of trusting youth, and that idea, himself and Fabien Galtier, and Laporte's conversation with them, of how do you go about doing it. And he said there's a huge risk with the idea that you may lose a load of matches and you may damage some young guys who are only then used to losing. But they said, well, we have a fairly extraordinary group, and we don't concentrate on what they're not good at. We don't even talk about what they're not good at. We talk about what they're great at. And let's see if we can start building that in. But everything was to do with preparation about going to do it. He went down, and actually he wanted to have a look at different culture, and he spent 4 months down in New Zealand as a coach of a junior team, just to see what the whole thing was like, to try and understand, could they start to do things differently.
They put a long-term plan in place with a long-term goal, all connected to the fact that they're hosting a World Cup. And again, there was a crop of youngsters who were coming through, which, you know, you can't say Laporte and Galtier and Ibanez had a connection in creating, but they managing those is actually very difficult sometimes. You'd have to say that the Munster Academy is going in the right direction after a long period of time. The kids who we saw, we talked about this during the week in the Heineken Cup, played brilliantly, and yet Chris Cloete got the start at the weekend, and we've talked about him all week, and it seems unfair that we're signalling him out, but it just for me is a signifier that this coaching ticket, and Cloete's joining them next year, this coaching ticket is not the right thing at the moment for Munster. Like, Peter Mahoney is saying it's not ideal. When a player like Peter Mahoney is saying it's not an ideal situation, you know that it's difficult for him to say that, because he's so loyal. And like, I feel like they've wasted the last 4 or 5 years of his career chasing this South African dream, which has not led to a new Munster identity, a modern Munster identity. Yeah,
so I don't know. I don't think that they've wasted it. I think that's, for me, that wouldn't be a phrase I'd use. What I would say is that under Rassie Erasmus, they really steadied the ship, and they got themselves into a good place. I remember having conversations with Johan at the start, and he had a very good plan for it, and he of what he would expect the team to look like and how it would go. And for me, there's a couple of issues with it. Is that I think if you're talking about Munster properly, you need Munster to be the vast majority to have come through Munster. So I think some of this maybe of that Van Graan isn't that type of coach, and he wants to play in a particular type of way. Now, I've never a huge fan of any coach that says this is the style and this is the way you have to play, because I think you need to use the players that you have at your disposal and get the most out of them. But I would look at like a lot of professional rugby everywhere is, whatever it is now, 27 or 8 years in, is still trying to find its feet, still trying to understand what it is and where it is. Munster success, and everybody hates when you hear about the Munster success back in the 2000s, but that was actually built on a very good link of local senior rugby teams in Cork and Limerick. That's what it was built on. A lot of players that had come through the amateur and had passed on their culture to the players that were in there. It was a lot of that stemmed from that, and then stemmed from some of the players that came in from overseas. John Langford, who I mention all the time as having one of the biggest influences on what culture was in that team. He was extraordinary. He was world-class in attitude. He wasn't a world-class player. He was a fantastic line-out operator, but his attitude was incredible. He had a huge impact on other people. But like, it almost looks like a time, and I've said this for a number of years actually, but that you need to almost have a summit for all the stakeholders in Munster, which is the schools and the clubs and the senior clubs and the professional game, to try and figure out, is there a Munster solution for this Munster problem? Because it can't just be that everything is stacked in Leinster's favour, and it can't just be that it's kind of almost biased in favour of Leinster. Leinster has a bigger population. It has a lot of private schools which have a lot of private coaching, so players get really, really well coached. And I've watched a lot of schools rugby over the last number of years, and up until about 15 or 16, they're incredibly similar, Munster and Leinster. In that next step afterwards, there's a very significant jump. But that's the nature of it. So we don't have that full structure in Munster, but it's trying to get all the stakeholders together. So if we were only talking about there being a bit of a problem with Munster at the head coach level, or but there's arguments going on for referees and a whole variety of different things that have been going on for the last while. So like, it needs to say, can you actually, I'm not saying break the whole thing up, but can you have a little look and say, can we work together in a straight line for this? So there's difficulty for players moving from club to club or moving from school to school. I mean, it's as if, let's try and make this quite awkward. So I would say, in terms of preparation, which was the point that I had with Rafael Ibanez, the preparation was like, what can we do now? Like, there's a huge rush now, colossal rush. We need a new coach. Let's get a new coach. Let's get him in as quickly as we possibly can. I don't know what that clamour is for, because actually what we need to do is have a coaching ticket that has a coaching mindset to improve all the young kids that are coming through the system. And that's, so I would actually take my foot off the pedal for that. And it could well be, and I think Graham Rowntree has to be part of that, and he could well become that guy. But because of the manner in which Van Graan had agreed to a contract and then took a new opportunity to get out of it, it took a 6-month clause, which I still think is a ludicrous clause to have in your contract. But because of that, we're floundering for a new coach, and it's a dreadful time to get a new coach. So I would say just slow it down, because this has to be the absolutely right appointment, whatever that is. And no, like we're all, like, I'm used to play, but I haven't played for a long time. I couldn't tell you whether these coaches are good coaches or not, you know. So, but the next coach for Munster and the next coaching ticket for Munster has to be something that maximises the quality of some of the young kids coming through, and then really supports that. I mean, I talked to Ian Costello. So Ian Costello has taken over the academy. He's got a decent plan in place for the pathway. That's what needs to be invested in. I mean, that's the future. So we can talk about all the issues of the past, and we can talk about all of those things, but actually, if you're looking at Munster rugby, you want to tidy it up with a structure. It doesn't mean you win, actually, but it means. But I think it's something you can stand for and something you can stand behind.
That's really interesting, that the pathway that's happening at the moment, it is very different to the one that produced the team of the 2000s. And like, I hate to go back to that Wasps game because it's only one game, but like if you look at the makeup of the squad that day, I think Daniel O'Keke was the only Limerick-based player, or the player who came through the Limerick system, and that's been used as a stick to beat Munster with. That, you know, hurling has won the battle in Limerick. Whereas you look at someone like Patrick Campbell, who played that day, who was an underage GAA star with Cork. Yeah. Munster have arguably won the battle in terms of winning somebody like him away from GAA. So good things are happening, as well as the geographical shift that appears to be happening as well.
Well, I would think so, and I have to say, since Ian Costello has come back from Wasps, and now there's been a kind of view that Ian Costello maybe should be in the coaching ticket. I would say resist that with everything you have, because he has the opportunity to build the next generation, maybe the next 2 generations of players coming through, and I think that is the most important piece, and it has been for a while, and it's the support that he needs, I suppose, in terms of financial, to make certain that they can build that out properly, because Leinster have done elements of that, but Leinster also have an incredible funnel of players coming through that are almost professional from schools, and I'm not complaining about that. I think it's a fine system.
Well, you could ape it a little bit. Instead of spending money on big name imports, if you were to invest that money in the coaching at that level, the 16-year-olds for the schools, except paid for by the Munster branch, that might be a way to short circuit that. I just want to go back to one thing that we brought it up on Monday, and Cian brought it up yesterday in the show. Munster wanted Van Graan to stay. He rejected them. So Munster wanted what they've got at the moment. They wanted more of this. The Munster hierarchy decided that they saw what Van Graan was doing, and they were like, yeah, that's exactly what we want. That's a problem.
Well, I actually do think that is a problem, but equally well for me, and it's not, like, I know Johan, so this sounds it's not personal, and I don't, of course it's personal because he's going to say you're criticising, but it's not, that's the way he coaches. So I think we know that. So then it becomes that you have to say, well, why is that decision being made further up? I looked at a comment that Victor Matfield said that Johan had complained to him. I don't know, it's kind of hearsay after hearsay kind of in a way, but that Johan had said that all the best players go to Leinster. No, and it's very hard to try and do this without being almost xenophobic, but the idea of having most of the players coming from Munster, I think, means you have a closer link to all the Munster fans. And I think Munster fans will be far more forgiving for young guys coming through the system and not being perfect at start, you know. And I think that there's an element of that needs to kind of happen. And that it can't just be the fact that we can take players that aren't, that are rejects from Leinster, or that people who want to get another chance. I've no issue with those players playing, but I think our core should be driving it from Munster. And if I go back to that reflection again back in the 2000s, that Munster team had world-class players, but a chunk of them were Irish and a chunk of them were Munster. I think that's actually where it sits. Now it takes a period of time to go and do that, and are people willing, as supporters, willing to take the view that actually this may take another year or 2 years to try and get a chunk of these guys through, and we could go through some really, really tough times, but we can see a discernible Munster way or culture or whatever it is that suits. So for me, the thing for me is with Johan is that I don't like the style of rugby. And it wins a lot of matches, but I don't know that it necessarily wins the big matches. So for me, that's part of the issue. And whether the players are good enough or not for that, but so I would have said, if we were being honest, that last weekend, even though it was disheartening, showed that there was more willingness to try more. But I still feel we drift back into one-out runners 10 yards from the line, which works sometimes, but we do it too often. And we kick the ball away, and every time we kicked the ball away to Leinster last week, they looked dangerous.
Sorry, is this the crisis point then, or like, because it feels like you've said the next coach is going to be hugely important, and I get the point about the structures, and they should definitely have that summit that you're talking about and engage as many of the stakeholders as they possibly can and say, here's our plan for the future. But that's the hierarchy's job to do it. The next coach's job would be to make the team as successful on the field as they can within the parameters of that plan. You're saying cool the jets a bit on the coaching decision to the point where you can get more available coaches at the end of the year. Is that what you're thinking?
Do you know what? I don't know, but coaches often crop up at different times, right? So if there's none at the moment, I'm not saying we don't have to go on an interim solution or anything like that, and people say, God, that's not right. Well, if you just need to make, like, it's David Nucifora and the Munster board have to get their head around who is the person that they can get. But it isn't, let's give the job to someone who can do it. They have to really define what the job is. And the job is not, you will not have a checkbook to buy players from overseas all the time. And I always think Munster should have a couple, actually. And I've always said it, I'd like them to be retired from international rugby so you can get the best out of them when the Irish guys are away at camp or whatever it is, or on those weeks that are a bit different, you can have that influence around. I think that's something that you're looking to try and do. But I think the coach has to know that there are limitations within the Irish system. There are structures that are used, which Leinster manage incredibly well. They have the depth to do so, and I said it was seamless earlier on. It isn't that seamless with Munster, but I also think that there's a lot of players have been brought in to play for Munster that haven't been developed through the academy system. So, like, it isn't a perfect storm, and it isn't. For me, it isn't a crisis yet, but it isn't a crisis because we're expecting some decent decisions to be made, and it's very hard to.
By the people who decided they wanted Van Gran.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That's the
no, but again, I would have said that Van Gran at the start was a good follow-on from Razzie Erasmus, and we can't go with 2020 rear view vision. You know, it's
no, but they gave him a new contract.
No, and I know, and so for me, I would have said, I don't know if you remember what we said it, and the conversation we had in October. It's time to trust the youth a little bit more. It's maybe to try and play a little bit more. I mean, I'd love to see all those young guys. You talked about the Wasps game. I'd like to see all those guys being given a run. I mean, if I looked at the team I wanted to play at the weekend, I did it this morning in the car. Which of course I can't open my phone, but there you go. But it was different because. Like, I don't want to throw everybody out. That's not it either. But I looked at having, like, which sounds like heresy in some respects, but I'd put Carberry at 15 because I want what it can be something that changes the way Munster play. Carberry, Daly, Earls at 13, even though he'll fit in there and he'll do a job for you. But I think you need a bit of an extra spark. Dielende 12. Either Haley or Zebo on one wing. I'd have Healy at out half, Casey at scrum half. I'd have Kendallin at 8, and I actually think he is a joy to watch. And I'd have O'Mahony and O'Donoghue in the back row, Klein, Wycherley again in the front row, Archer, Scannell. Why not?
Well, it's a good mix.
Well, it's a good mix, but it's also...
You've got a really strong bench.
You have a strong bench then, and you have a lot of guys that are in there that can do some decent stuff from the bench. So there are players that are there. Some of those players have played well this year, and so look, for me, I think it's why I was so vociferous before Christmas was after the game in Wasps, where youth was given its chance and delivered. Now, there was a lot that doesn't hold up that you have to pick them all the way in.
No.
And it doesn't. But at some stage you do have to make...
Well, what do we have? We don't know what we have because we never try.
No, so for me, I still go with the idea, what's best now? And I think best is to take our time and maybe see if give youth a chance a little would be what I would be saying.
Is the IRFU making the appointment the right thing for Munster? Should there be more of a Munster influence on a Munster decision ultimately?
Again, when I talk about a summit, it's to try and say, right, can we have not transparency, but can we have a conversation where we can understand where a lot of the different needs are within the game in Munster, within the structure in Munster, within how it's done and how it's dealt with. So the IRFU, it's like when we definitely discussed this when we did the State of the Union a while back. That when the IRFU, when COVID happened, the IRFU were not found wanting, you know. And I'm watching a lot of clubs in the UK who hemorrhaged money, who were suffering quite heavily, and there's a salary cap that's put in now, which is having a drastic change in how English rugby is going. There's players leaving. Faf de Klerk is leaving Sale as of this morning. There's players kind of moving all over the place because they have to hit their salary cap. There was the IRFU put a support structure in to make certain that clubs would survive, and so for that, I don't think you give money unconditionally. I think it's fair and right that they have a proper input within it, because it's funded mostly, and like rugby survives on international monies. There's other monies that are brought into it, but rugby survives. Like all the clubs in the UK lose money. You know, the
counter argument is, of course, that the teams providing the international players,
of course, it is.
They're the ones, and so therefore, you would expect that they pay back. Because it is,
that's their funnel. I'm saying that they should be paying back, but I'm saying they should have a say.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and so there has to be those levels of conversation.
Well, on that point, right, is there anybody in the Irish system at the moment who could take the Munster job and who you would say would go and be an improvement on what we're seeing at the moment? People are texting in Andy Friend, and it would be terrible for Connacht to lose Andy Friend, I think, because he's done an excellent job there. And the difference between that team when he has his internationals and when he doesn't, it's like he gets punished in a way for being really good at his job, where all his best players get taken out of the team, they get hockey, the best players come back and they start winning again. It's like, It's almost as if literally he's getting punished for doing an excellent job. But somebody like him, or could they in any way entice Lancaster and say, we think you're one of the most important coaches in our system, and we have a succession plan that we need to put in place. Is that even? I think that's
incredibly uncomfortable for everybody, and I do think that Lancaster, actually, if I look at Leinster system, forget about all the schools and all that. They had their outgoing CEO has been involved for a long time and has. I think has played the good corporate game that was required to be able to do all that, and has done a very good job. I think in Guy Easterby, you've again a very strong rugby capability, and has been in and around for a lot. They mop up as many backroom guys as they can. Lancaster has been an incredibly astute selection as a coach. He doesn't want to be front and centre. He got burned in England, in the manner of being the top guy, and it just didn't, whether it didn't suit him or didn't wear with him. He looks and seems incredibly happy with what he's doing. But then Contepone comes up, so there's a huge amount of serious coaches. I think Leo Cullen doesn't ever get the credit that he deserves as an incredibly calm and steadying force as captain, and then to whatever his title is.
No, it's a truly great Irish rugby career that Leo Cullen's put together.
It's an ideal route for that, and it fits the bill for it. So, but I would be, actually, to the point you asked, are there people there that could help within it? The requirement is, if we put the rivalry aside and we start thinking Ireland and Ireland only, it does require stronger teams just than Leinster. You need that.
So what are you saying about Lancaster? If you owned, say you were the owner of Munster, and there was a coach there with one of your main who hasn't got the main gig, would you be like, I'm just going to offer him the main gig and see what happens?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I think he's been, but so what I would always say, so I'm not answering it, right? What I would always say is.
Yes, you are. Come on.
No, I will get to it.
Okay.
But when you bring people in, make certain all those support structures are around you. So Stuart Lancaster went in with with effectively a human shield in Leo Cullen in front of him, and he's been allowed to go and do what he does really well, which is coach young guys. Would he be good for Munster? You're dead right, he would. Of course he would. I think it would cause an unbelievable stink.
Yeah, but that's
what
they should be trying to do, isn't it? Like, it's...
Yeah, but I've even looked within the idea that we have lots of coaches that are in the international setup. Like, we need to make certain these things are... that these teams survive. There's no benefit to Leinster, as an example, if Munster go down the tubes. There just isn't, because
they need the rivalry, they need the numbers,
stuff that builds it up. So, like, whether you put additional pressure on the national coaches to come and help in an interim period of time until we get whatever it is the right thing. But of course, Stuart Lancaster he's a coach of coaches as well, and he is.
But I don't know if they're thinking like that. That's my concern is that, like, I don't. The transparency issue is real. We don't know what's going on. It's been 4 months since Van Graan announced, and the only person who's really publicly said is that Roundtree that he's interested in. He said it in the Red 78 podcast, and fair play to him. I don't think he should be in any way tarnished by what's happening at the moment. We've seen Andy Farrell transform Ireland's playing style, despite the fact he was in under Joe Schmidt. It's very possible that he could be somebody who puts the coaching ticket around
I think he's
him.
very well liked, and I think he can be part of the solution, whether he's the main solution or not. If he was, he would need 3 or 4 coaches that are incredibly good at building skill sets.
Yeah, so you could break the bank, get Mike Prendergast back, get a few others, get some kind of dream team going where, oh yeah, all right.
But with all the best will in the world, we're watching it from afar, but we're not stuck in the midst of it, so we don't know.
No.
But we're allowed to dream, aren't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, Munster should be dreaming. It's one of the best jobs. That's the last point. Just to finish this up, it is still a brilliant job. It is one of the most important Irish sports institutions. And so much of Irish rugby is invested in Munster being good. That's why we should all care about this.
Well, if we were to go and go out to the airwaves for prospective appliers for this job and say, if you turn Munster around into a winning team, I think your coaching ticket is set for the future. And all the coaches that have gone through the Munster system have bought into a lot of the good things of it, have made changes or haven't made changes, but they've moved on to very good jobs afterwards. So it's...
Even the ones who haven't done such an amazing job have got...
Yeah. But Munster don't want to be a stepping stone to anything. And I think it's very important that Munster get to build... I think to build on the youth system, on what Costello is trying to enact, and try and build it properly for the future. And so it goes back to us dreaming, but I go and look at this weekend and still dream that Munster have an ability of turning over Exeter, because they have that ability.
Yeah.
And so that's an intangible, but I'll still grasp for it if I can.
Well, that's sport. That is sport. Keith, good stuff. Thanks a million for that. Great to have you back with us.